who is joining us electronically and who I skipped over. Let me turn to Senator Hirono now.
Thank you. Does that mean that I get 10 minutes? I would like to associate myself with your opening remarks and the remarks of the Judiciary Committee Chair Durbin. I heard Professor Adler say that the Roberts Court is quantitatively business-oriented, but not necessarily qualitatively so. I would say that one of the most consequential decisions that the Roberts Court made, which opened the floodgates to dark money, is Citizens United. I'd say that decision, you know what, we can argue about maybe some of the other decisions that weren't so consequential. Hey, to me, that is like an A1 consequential decision. So there you go. I have a question for Professor Klarman, Mr. Jealous, and also Ms. Graves. And I know that the chair is going to get to this, but the bottom line for me in this hearing is that we can argue all we want about who's accepting dark money, both the left and the right, conservative, liberal, accepting dark money. But the bottom line is that all of this should be disclosed. So I want to start by saying there is clearly dark money being used to fund political campaigns and activities. And there are arguments from Democrats that Leonard Leo, the Federalist Society, and the Brain Trusts have been using dark money to capture our federal courts. How do I know this? Because I've been sitting on the Judiciary Committee pretty much ever since I became elected to the Senate. So Republicans have been arguing that the left is increasingly using dark money. A simple solution would be to require everyone to disclose where their money comes from. But so far, only Democrats are supporting that. Only Democrats are saying that everybody's dark money should be disclosed. So for Ms. Graves, Professor Klarman, and Mr. Jealous, what role can disclosure play in addressing the dark money problem?
Senator, thank you so much for that question. And I think that that's precisely the point my friends and I have been talking about. While some of the witnesses on this panel want to talk about left spending, what's interesting is that if left spending is the biggest, why are almost all the left groups urging that the Disclose Act be passed? I think to draw this in a partisan line is unfortunate, because in fact it should be common sense, American values to say we want more transparency. We want to make sure that this dark money is not hidden. And I support what you said and how you described it, Senator.
Professor Klarman?
Well, I certainly agree with that. I think the case that was made by the other witnesses was a good argument for requiring the left to disclose dark money as well as the right. If you just asked an ordinary citizen their opinion, somebody's giving you advice, your doctor is giving you advice about what medication to take. Do you not think everybody would agree that they would want to know whether the doctor had a financial interest with a pharmaceutical company in prescribing a certain drug? Well, of course, the answer is yes. Everybody would like to know if the Coke network is spending money opposing light rail transportation that's up for a referendum in Nashville, and their argument is simply, oh, this is going to raise your taxes. Do you not think the ordinary citizen would want to know that the Koch brothers depend entirely on people continuing to use fossil fuel and drive their cars, thus they have they regard a light rail as an existential threat to their business? And the answer is, of course, everybody would want to know that. The only question here is whether there's some constitutional constraint. And I imagine we're going to talk more about, well, there's NAACP versus Alabama, which is a very, very different case. So in 1958.
It is a very specific case. I'm somewhat familiar with the facts of that 1958 case. And to use that to protect the disclosure of dark money because some people might get hurt or whatever, I'd like to see the evidence. It's like there's no evidence that there was fraud in the elections, but that doesn't stop certain people from continuing to push out those kinds of positions. So yes, if that's the only case, that ain't much. Mr. Jealous, would you like to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I would just like to thank you, Senator. And it's deeply troubling and offensive that case keeps getting used by the right. I've sat with the adult children of the martyrs of our association, of the NAACP. And the reason that the membership lists were protected at the time was that the Alabama state government was in league with the Ku Klux Klan in unleashing terror on our members, and we protected it to make sure that they would not be killed. I would ask, your colleague, Senator Lee and Ranking Member Kennedy, if they'd be willing to ask the groups that support them and their causes to disclose. What we're asking for here is simply bilateral disarmament for their, to turn on the light. And I know that Mr. Walter thought it was unthinkable to have a hearing without dark money. I guess there was a time in the US Congress when it was unthinkable to have a hearing without gaslighting, but we moved forward to the light bulb, and we found that more light actually made the process work better. And so respectfully, I do think it's quite thinkable to have a hearing without dark money. And it's in fact what most of the people in the country want. Exactly.
I could go on. I just want to end by referring to some of the questions for Ms. Graves. The Federalist Society or the Judicial Crisis Network is not spending $17 million to get people onto the Supreme Court because they're just, they've done their research as to where the nominees that they're supporting are coming from. They are, of course, spending this money to support judicial nominees for lifetime positions that are probably more in alignment with their positions based on their prior records, their statements, their writings. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. You might want to stick around for 1 second. Senator Kennedy has exerted a point of personal privilege.
Yeah, Mr.